Hello, Vaughn.
Hello, Harold.
All right. You've written not one, not two, but three columns this week on a new book, John Horgan's memoirs. You've read a lot of political books about BC over the years, written political books about BC over the years. What's so special about this one that you'd write?
Harold, I've read a lot of political memoirs, and a lot of political memoirs suffer from kind of excessive self-justification and score settling, and they gloss over the things that didn't work very well. And John Horgan's book is not like that at all. I mean, this is John Horgan in his own words, and it is as candid and provocative and stimulating as was John Horgan, the man himself. And again, I'll judge the credibility of a book, not by the stuff that went well, although Horgan, a lot went well for him, but what do you say about the stuff that didn't work? So Horgan has an entire chapter in this book on the government's policies for dealing with mental health, addictions, and the opioid drug crisis. And he tells you that almost nothing that they tried worked. It was unsuccessful. And he tells you the assumptions they made that were wrong. And I mean, it's a fascinating chapter because we know it didn't work out. But to have the guy in charge come out and say, everything I tried was unsuccessful, I look at that and I go, so when John Horgan in a different chapter tells you that he doesn't think they made many mistakes managing the pandemic, to me, that gives the book a lot of credibility. And I also think people will just be charmed and entertained by Horgan. One of the funny sequences in the book is Horgan decides when he's in opposition to campaign in his own riding by riding the bus, because he finds that public meetings are dominated by people who just come to complain again and again and again. So he says, I'm going to ride the bus. So he's going to ride the bus. And his paper, the local paper, they put an ad in saying, if you want to talk to John Horgan, you'll be on the Souk bus, such and such a time, right? And then Horgan says, of course, the problem with talking to people standing up on a bus on that very twisty, windy road, because it is you're turning this way and you're turning that and everything. He said, I had to start taking gravel because this is from the book, because barfing on your constituents is not a good strategy for re-election. So I think people are just going to laugh at times. They're going to remember, a lot of people are going to remember the guy they voted for. And I mean, I've talked to lots of people who tell me that, they never voted for NDP. They voted for John Horgan, right? I mean, as I said, the opinion polls, John Horgan was more popular when he left office than when he became premier. That almost never happens in the political system. Right. Almost never happens. So, I recommend the book. I gather we're running an excerpt on the weekend.
We are running an excerpt, and I know the book is not out for a few weeks, but I know you can go online and pre-order it for anyone who's interested, for sure, from the usual retailers, online retailers, as well as Harbor Publishing. And we should also note that it was co-authored, in a sense, by Rod Mickelberg, journalist and
Worked for
author.
The Vancouver Sun.
Worked for the Vancouver Sun, yes.
Rod worked for the Vancouver Sun so long ago that he was there when I started. So that's how old Rod is. And he did an amazing job, because this is all put together from interviews that Rod did. And Rod did the very last interview with Horgan on October the 2nd of last year by Zoom. Horgan was in a hospital bed in Berlin, and Rod interviewed him by Zoom. One of a series of interviews. Well, Horgan died on November the 21st. So this book is, John Horgan really wanted to tell his story. So Mickelberg then takes all of those interviews and organizes them into the chapters, keeping the book in Horgan's voice. So, it's John Horgan's book, but if it hadn't been for Mickelberg's hard work, we wouldn't have the book the way it is.
Now, you mentioned, just staying with the book for one more moment, you mentioned his mea culpa around addictions and mental health. Is there anything in this book that is going to be problematic for David Eby and the current government?
Well, it's interesting. You know, Horgan is very candid and open about his own record. He says almost nothing about David Eby. I mean, there's very little in there about David Eby, but there's one thing that, you know, you can't avoid the conclusion. Horgan tells you that he is very proud of the fact that as premier, he exploded the myth that an NDP government couldn't manage provincial finances. The audited financial statements of BC bear that out. Horgan balanced budgets. He delivered surpluses. He left a surplus behind of about $6 billion, and Eby spent it. And ever since Horgan left office, David Eby has been running up the debt and running up the deficit. Now, you know, Horgan wasn't here for all that, and he doesn't say anything about it, but you can't help but draw the contrast that, and Horgan says he's very proud of the fact that he instilled fiscal discipline into the NDP. Well, fiscal discipline left office for the NDP with John Horgan. And we don't have anything resembling that now, and it's a huge struggle for Eby. So I would say Horgan doesn't say it, but the contrast is there and obvious to anybody who's been following what happened since Horgan left office.
Back in Victoria, boy, the big court case involving the properties in Richmond, BC Conservatives want this to go right to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Right away.
Right away. Now, that is possible. You can reference it.
It is possible to do it. It's called a reference case. And basically, you go to the High Court. It has to be the federal government.
Okay.
The federal government can go to the Supreme Court of Canada and say, we'd like you to clarify this issue or answer this question. And you may remember in the 1990s, the Chrétien government did this on what conditions would it take for Quebec to be able to pass a referendum to leave the country. So John Rostad, Conservatives, what they're saying is they've talked to business communities, people in real estate and housing and all that. And this court decision raised question for the first time about the status of private property where there's a finding of Aboriginal title. The judge in the case said there's an open question as to how much of the title to private property survives where a court has made a finding of Aboriginal title. So let's put a cloud over. Right? But Rostad said we can't wait for this thing to work its way through the court system, which will take years. He says Ottawa needs to clarify the status of private land now, and they need to do it by going straight to the Supreme Court of Canada. So it's a strong position. It's brought a pretty strong response, though, from Attorney General Nikki Sharma. And it's a respectful response. She says the government agrees with the Conservatives that we need to clarify the status of private property. Province tried in the case. They lost their arguments. The judge didn't agree with them. And the province is now appealing. But Sharma is kind of one of those be careful what you wish for warnings. She says, you go to the Supreme Court of Canada, or Ottawa goes to the Supreme Court of Canada right now, the High Court might refuse to take the case. High Court generally, it says, let's wait and see what the trial court does with it. Let's wait and see what the appeal court does with it. The High Court doesn't want to necessarily wade into this. And of course, the other thing is the High Court might not issue a clear decision. And it might not be binding. So she says, yeah, we need this clarified, but really the only way to do that is what the province is doing. It's preparing an appeal. It will file very soon with the BC Court of Appeal, and then we'll, yes, probably be on our way to the Supreme Court of Canada as well. So, I mean, it's a legitimate debate. The thing I think that I find, you know, the opposition and the government will normally be, you know, way opposite sides, massive disagreement. On this one, the opposition and the government agree that this decision needs to be challenged, and we need a clear statement on protecting private property rights. But they're just disagreeing about the best way to go about that. And they both have a point to make, but it looks at this point like probably Ottawa doesn't want any part of this, and probably we're just going to have to wait while the Court of Appeal deals with it, and then whoever wins or loses at the Court of Appeal will be on to the Supreme Court of Canada eventually.
Okay, so you do think this ultimately does have to play out in the court. There's no alternative path to get us more quickly beyond the uncertainty?
I don't think so. You know, there's been statements that, oh, well, you know, the impact of this is exaggerated. The court didn't actually, the First Nation didn't, Cowichan tribes didn't actually seek to be handed the private land, and the court didn't hand it over. It simply made a finding. But the problem with that is that one of the lawyers for the winning First Nation, the Cowichan tribes, he said, well, you know, if you try to sell that private land, it could be a problem. Because are you going to buy a piece of private property, a home or land, privately owned, if there's a question about whether or not the title will survive this finding of Aboriginal title? Like it's already going to have an effect on that land. And this won't be the last case where the status of private land is at issue. The government's great fear here, the reason the New Democrats immediately said they were going to appeal, is they fear that they fear it will undermine public support for reconciliation. The government thinks that as long as people think we're negotiating the status of Crown land, sharing resources with Indigenous people, there is some support for that, maybe a lot of support depending on what we're doing. But if people get the idea that these negotiations also involve the title to their own house, the title to private land around the province, the government believes that will undermine support for reconciliation. I think the government's probably right about that. I think that's why the New Democrats were in such a hurry to appeal this. Normally, when a big court decision comes down, the government will say, well, we have 30 days to decide whether or not to appeal, and we're going to read the decision and all that. No, the decision came down on a Friday, and the Attorney General was in a press conference on the Monday saying we're going to appeal this. Like there was no question the New Democrats were going to appeal this because they worry it will undermine their effort to reconcile with First Nations.
Right. Excuse me. The other big challenge for the government this summer, is all of those labor contracts, public sector labor contracts that have come up. We had some movement on one of them.
Yeah, up until yesterday afternoon or Thursday afternoon at 4:00, there had been no settlements. And usually it's bargaining year for all public sector workers. The contracts all expire in the same year. And usually by this time you got some deals. We did nothing. And then Thursday afternoon at 4:00, we get a news release from the government that it has a tentative settlement with the largest union of all in the public sector, the Hospital Employees Union and related unions in healthcare, mostly healthcare workers, the people who clean the hotel, the hospital rooms, and the janitor staff and clerical and all that. There's 67,000 of them, and the government has a tentative deal with them. They didn't release the terms. They wouldn't normally do that until the members have had a chance to vote on it and seen the deal. The BC General Employees Union, which represents the workers in central government, was going to announce the result of a strike vote. So the strike vote is a union that thinks the government wasn't offering nearly enough money to them. And out comes the government saying, we got a deal. And we got a deal with the biggest union of them all. And the BCGEU wasn't happy. They said they were unhappy that they were undercut by another public sector union. But the key here is the New Democrats went to the union and they said, hospital employees, got a pay cut of 15% under the BC Liberals 21 years ago, 2004. The government said, we think that's unfair, and we're going to offer you redress. We're going to offer you that we're going to close that gap over a period of time with a front end payment in this contract. And I don't know the details of the negotiation, but I'm betting that the government also told the union, and you got to sign tentative before Friday when the BCGEU is going to put out its statement. So this offer is only for the Hospital Employees Union, because they're the ones, says the New Democrats, that got the unjust cut 21 years ago. So that seems to have been the key. The agreement is, we don't have all the details. It isn't ratified, but this is the first sign of progress at all at the bargaining this year. And in that sense, I think, the New Democrats are quite happy, and they're happy that they managed to accomplish it with the biggest public sector union of all. We've still got teachers and nurses, and you know, the BCGEU is probably not going to be very happy. The BCGEU is asking more than twice as much as what was in the government's final or opening offer. I think it's probably a pretty good bet that if you take out that side deal for the Hospital Employees Union, the government and the union are probably settling considerably less than the BCGEU was asking. So it undercuts that too.
Right. But of course the BCGEU is going to say that that's just fun with numbers, that you're going back 21 years to right a wrong. What about the many times we didn't get what we wanted? Anyways,
but it was that 2004 thing. It's not very often you see a government impose something that goes backwards, right? It really was. It was a big rollback. And remember, the Hospital Employees Union, they're not the nurses, they're not the doctors, they're not the technicians and the professionals, right? These are some of the lowest paid people in the system, mostly women, many of them South Asians, and they've not forgotten.
Well, care aids is another big piece of it.
That's right.
And they're very important, we know, to an overwhelmed system right now. So this will be interesting to see how it all plays out. All right, Vaughn, thank you. Have a long weekend.
Good. And everybody, I hope they enjoy the excerpt from the book this weekend, and I hope it sends them off to buy the book, because it's a good one.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Harold.